Thank you all. I would like to start by really thanking all of you, the organizers and the audience of this occasion, and that's point number one. Point number two, it really is an honor to attend any event of people who are starving for democracy and who are determined to get it. Now, in light of what has been going on in the Middle East, it's really an honor to be among you here, and any step, any progress that the Ethiopians would do is certainly going to be a plus for the budding revolutions in the Middle East and vice versa. Any success of the Middle Eastern revolutions will certainly be a support for the legitimate demand of the Ethiopian people. I will be just talking briefly about very few points in order to just make it in 12 to 15 minutes. Point number one is that all regimes die hard. They do die hard, and the reason of that is the fact that these regimes penetrate the society and penetrate the administration, the government, the local communities. They do have the resources, they influence the villagers, they influence the uneducated, they do pay for religious people to propagate for them, they do have the resources to control the media, and so on and so forth. So what happened in Egypt and Tunisia so far is that we have Mubarak ousted, but we still do have many of his governors are in power. And it has been a continuing battle between the Democrats in Egypt and the members or the affiliates with the old regime to oust them. They fill the mass media, they fill the local governments, and more importantly, they do ally with some other factions that can find interest with them, such as some factions of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they try to bluff the people by saying, okay, you are protesting against Mubarak, Mubarak is out. Yes, Mubarak is out, but the regime is still in. The essence of a revolution is to change the basic behavior and ideas from that of a totalitarian behavior that you don't only see in the government, but you also see in the family, you see in the school, you see it when you go to any government office or bureau just to issue a license, a driver's license, or whatever it is. People are oriented somehow to think totalitarian, and they are brought up based on totalitarian values. A revolution is supposed to be complete when the revolution is ready to overcome these totalitarian values in our own minds, in our own behavior. And therefore, it is not a coincidence that the vanguard of the revolutions that happened in Tunisia and Egypt, and what is happening now in Yemen, Syria, and Libya, are the young people. That's point number one, and I would recommend that you would really be aware of the fact that whatever a regime, if you can oust the head of the regime, but beware that the regime is penetrating the full range of the society and penetrating the mentalities of many of the many segments of the population. Point number two is the peaceful vis-a-vis armed resistance. The two examples that we have are the Syrian example and the Egyptian example. The Syrian example, right now, the scene in Syria is threatened by the transformation of the peaceful resistance to an armed resistance, because the regime, the Syrian regime, has used brutal force. They are using helicopters in order to kill people and kill civilians. And therefore, what is happening now is that there are the early signs that it could be turned into armed resistance. And this is going to be very dangerous, because my feeling is that the regime is trying to provoke people to go to arms, and therefore there would be an excuse for the regime to commit massacres. The father of the present president of Syria, Hafez al-Assad, in 1982, he killed about 30,000 people in Hama, which is one of the major cities of Syria, because he claimed that it was armed resistance. And right now, if it becomes armed resistance, then it will be much bloodier. However, the examples of Tunisia and Egypt would show that the chances for peaceful resistance and for standing the provocation of the security forces it pays off if people can really take the brutal treatment of the security and the army later on. So the point in conclusion is that, the conclusion of this point is that peaceful resistance have proven to be more effective than armed resistance. That is in general. Of course, that depends on the composition of the society and the armed force and so on. Point number 3 is collectivism and down-to-up approach by intellectuals and leaders in the 21st century. In the 21st century, we can say that any new ideas or any innovation comes from down to up is chaotic, but it is really innovative. However, if it is the opposite, if it is from up to down, it is very organized, but usually stupid. So the leadership role in revolutions in the 21st century is to organize the chaos of the masses and be at the same time receptive, because these are the masses who are going to give you the innovative ideas through which you will have the edge over the security forces that is going to resist you and try to quell you. The Egyptian revolution did not have one leadership, and that was a great advantage, because the first thing that the security does is to cut the heads of the leaders. And one of the problems they had in the Egyptian case is that there were no one head, so they didn't know what to cut, and therefore they were finally defeated in the first stage of the revolution. The next point is the importance of the religious establishment and the clergy. Judging from the experience of Egypt, I do know that the majority of Egyptians are Muslims. We do have a large Coptic minority, which is the opposite in Ethiopia. You have Christians, the majority, and you have a minority of Muslims. However, in Egypt, the religious establishment historically has been very traditional thinking and has been indirectly supporting whatever reigns the country. Whoever is controlled, the religious establishment would support. In developing countries in general, religion plays a very important role, especially in villages and in small towns. People would go to a clergy and ask him about problems in marriage, health problems, problems in digestion, everything. They go to the religious guy, and then the religious guy would read the verses from the Quran or from the Bible and claim that everything is all right. So when you are engineering a revolution, please beware of the clergy. My personal feeling is that usually the clergy are on the traditional side. Many of them, excuse me for being blunt, tend to be so hypocrite, and they use the text, the holy text, for their own furtherance. It's an authority. The establishment is an authority, and beware that sometimes the religious establishment could be threatened by revolution because you are calling for a change of the general behavior and the general mentality of the people. However, there are always those who are honest among the religious establishment, and those could be very good allies for any revolution in the forming. The point after that is to be sensitive to the silent majority during and after the revolution. Most importantly, when their business stops and salaries dry. In Egypt, for instance, which is not known to be a rich country, on the contrary, we are more of a poor country than a rich country in terms of resources and income distribution and so on. People suddenly found that they cannot earn salaries, and those who have small stores, they are selling cheese and toys and stuff like this. Nobody is buying, and therefore they face a lot of difficulties. Couple that with the propaganda of the regime or the old regime, even after the regime is gone, or the symbols of the regime are gone, you find these people sometimes as a silent majority. They may just long for the good old days where Mr. Mubarak was here, at least we were making living. Those people have very short memory. and they just think for their day-to-day living, because they lived from day to day. They are earning their money from day to day, and all their energies are just devoted for how to feed their kids. And therefore, one should be very aware of the fact that when during the phases of the revolution and after, those people may not only being unsupportive, but they may turn against you, and this is a very painful feeling, because you know that you are working for yourself and working for them, and in order to make them understand, this is going to be a fairly difficult task. So this is a point that is I think is important. The next point is to study well how to counter the security. Security here, by security I mean the army, the police, and the intelligence during the peaceful protests. In Egypt, one thing that the Egyptians did was to exhaust the police. And exhausting the police happened by changing the tactic. And the tactic was very simple. Instead of starting the protests in big squares where the police can surround and can squeeze the demonstrators because they are one mass, they were divided into several small groups, and they would go into very poor areas where you have small alleys, very narrow, very tight, poor people who have really no future and no present under the present regime. You form groups of, probably the group would start with 50 people, and they should be dynamic and they should be on the move. And you should choose areas, let us say Addis Ababa, you choose areas where it has many outlets, so that the police cannot control 2 outlets, for instance. The police can block them, and then you are in trouble. But if there are several outlets of one spot, and if you do it in many spots in the area, the police would come to you, then you run. Don't face them. Run out of them how to counter tear gas. Usually these police forces are the commanders are very rigid, and they have very few tactics. And all what you need to know is to confuse them and exhaust them. You can put something over your nose and your mouth and so on, and the young people among you and those who are athletes can pick the tear gas and throw it back on the police. That tactic does work from time to time. And there are many things like that. Concerning the army, which is a very important point here, the reason that in countries which are sectarian or tribal, if the armed forces have a sectarian division, you have to be worried about that. In Syria, the reason that the army is shooting at people is that 70% of the Syrian soldiers are Alawites, which is the minority ruling class. As you know, the Syrian society is sectarian. They have Alawites, which is a minority Muslims. You have the Sunni Muslims, you have Christians, and you have the Druze. So because the regime is Alawite, so 70% of the soldiers are Alawite, and the officer corps, 80% of the officers are Alawites. And that is why, because of this sectarian thing, the Alawites feel that it is a life or death for them. If the Sunnis overcome, then the Sunnis perhaps are going to prosecute them for what they have done in the last 40 or 50 years. And therefore they are fighting as hard as it can. And therefore that explains why the Syrian army is really shooting at people, even with helicopters. But in Egypt and Syria, because these are not sectarian and not tribal countries, the army had, each one of them has different circumstances, but maybe for the questions and answers I will be happy to answer details. But basically in Yemen, Syria and Libya, these are either tribal or sectarian countries, and therefore there is a chance either for civil war, like in Libya and in Yemen, or for the army shooting at people because the majority are, they belong to the same sect of the ruling class. I'm not sure how the composition of the Ethiopian army, but perhaps you should really study this point very well. use the international fora and pressure. I think my colleagues talked about that, how to use the international fora, mass media. In that regard, I'm suggesting that all the revolting people like us, like you guys, we should have some sort of a consortium for all of us. If you want to pressure the White House and have a demonstration, I would love to see that besides you and supporting you, Egyptians and Yemenis and Libyans and even Palestinians and so on, that will enlarge your demonstration, that will show that thank you, and vice versa, so that we support each other, we make each other look big, and we cooperate. The point after that is the cultural dimension. Now, I said before that the essence of a revolution is to change the mentality and the behavior, and beware of the cultural dimension. Do not forget that we, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Middle Eastern countries are basically traditional conservative countries and societies, and they look at concepts like democracy and so on and so forth. They mix it with many other things, and they tend to see that this is important, these are not our values, and so on and so forth. The cultural dimension is very important, and this is really the essence of a revolution, that you should try your best to disseminate the values in the among the grassroots elements, that what is democracy, what is it for you and for your children to have that. No, this is not imported. No, this is not Western values. No, this is not colonialism, and so on and so forth. I would like to say that the cultural dimension of a revolution is among the most difficult and the most formidable obstacles for revolutionary guys like you when they are engineering and implementing a revolution. The point after that was talked about by my colleagues, that is to think how the transformation may happen from the very beginning. Now, you should see or foresee how the transformation may happen. I'm not going to elaborate about that because it was talked about it before, and I realized I took more time than I should. One of the two final points is that never despair. Never despair. I was in Egypt in last December, and came back to the United States on the 5th of April. I came back so depressed because I was there. I had the opportunity to meet many of the opposition leaders and many of the guys of the think tanks and public figures and so on. The Egyptian people were in a state of deep depression. 95% of the Egyptians were in a state of deep depression. And when I came back here and people would ask me what is going on, I said, well, it is so bad. It really is so bad. And it took only 20 days. On the 25th, I came on the 5th of January. On the 25th of January, the revolution erupted, and every hour of the revolution that we lived stuck to the TV screens and to the Skype and to the internet and to the Facebook, we were just kind of so excited because we didn't think that those unarmed people would really end up overcoming all the security forces that you have with their armored vehicles, with their inexhaustible resources, money, propaganda, tear gases, and so on and so forth. And every day, if you calculate it, you have no chance to win, but the people won. So this would be a lesson that you should not despair, guys. People will show you things, will show you wonders, and you would have never calculated how these wonders would have happened. Last point, which I touched on before, is that I really would hope that we will have long-term cooperation among all our peoples. All those people who are revolting in the Middle East and in Africa, we should cooperate. We are planning to hold a conference on the 22nd of July about the Egyptian revolution, and certainly you are all cordially invited to talk and to exchange views with us, and I will arrange with the organizers here for that, and I'm hoping that this occasion would be just the beginning for our long-term cooperation among all of us, and again it is an honor and a pleasure to be with you here. Thank you.
to Catherine Dunham for giving my pops his glory. He came down with his drum and a dream to change the world in a free, uplifting